as part of this kind of brief historical view of policy and behavioral health in the criminal justice system, the authors are going to take us through jail diversion programs, mental health courts, specialized probation, and forensic mental health services. So some of the one of the earliest policies is a jail diversion knowledge development program funded by SAMHSA in 1997. Towards the turn of the millennium, we see the beginnings of establishing what we came to know as mental health courts throughout the Department of Justice, and that was initially through America's Law Enforcement and Mental Health Project policy and legislation in 2000. Interestingly, the first administration to really put some formal policy from the White House was actually Bush W. And during his first term, part of the new Freedom Commission report highlighted this idea of in funding what they called jail diversion programs that were founded in getting people treatment, kind of the beginnings of this concept of treatment instead of incarceration. So those were, and again, this is a small number for sure, but this Mentally Ill Offender Treatment and Crime Reduction Act was really, at least according to the authors of this article, really represented the first kind of formal White House acknowledgement and policy around behavioral health and criminal justice involvement. So here the authors begin to walk us through what they believe are the flaws in these, not even so much the flaws in these jail diversion programs, but rather kind of more of a, if you remember this from kind of basic science, this concept of necessary but not sufficient. So in other words, it is something always getting treatment to people who are ill and don't have access, whether it's behavioral health or other, non-behavioral health conditions. When people don't have access to the health care that they need when they're ill, bad things happen, both from a human standpoint and an economic standpoint. And that's equally true. Now, this is my opinion, not from the authors, in the criminal justice system. But in terms of improving both what they call criminal justice as well as clinical outcomes for people already involved in the criminal justice system, and having a diagnosis of what they call serious mental illness. And they infer SMI to mean anything that's chronic and having a high functional impact. So that could certainly be depression as well as schizophrenia. So there's that. And so one of the things they begin to talk about here is they assert this notion that, well, perhaps the reason why these type of interventions aren't effective from when you look at data in terms of reducing criminal justice involvement is that perhaps that the reason why the primary reasons why people end up involved in the criminal justice system are that there's little difference between people with serious mental illness and people without. In other words, what the causational factors that are involved in people getting involved in the criminal justice system are universal across people with mental illness or behavioral health conditions and people without. So, um, so this begin to lay this foundation of we need to look at a multitude of factors, i.e., social determinant and psychosocial factors, and that just getting more treatment or better access to treatment is, then these are their words, not sufficient to achieve the desired outcomes. So just following the flow of the article, the way the authors wrote it was before we get further into this, okay, well, what do we need to reduce criminal justice involvement, to mitigate that risk, if you will? So before we get into that, well, let's look at what some of these programs actually look like. All right, so we have pre-booking diversion programs. All right, this would be more of like the CIT model, right? In fact, they note the common pre-booking diversion model is the crisis intervention. Having having law enforcement better trained to deal with people in their community who do have serious mental illness or behavioral health conditions, and that if they're able to intervene at the community level more effectively, this will reduce the need for arrest and booking. Right. So, at the time of this article, which is actually before the PBS piece on the Memphis model, there were about 1,000 police departments nationwide involved in some form of a CIT program, including the city of Memphis. So, if you think of pre-book CIT programs and things that help law enforcement improve their community interaction and be more effective out in the community, particularly with folks who have what they call serious mental illness, that this reduces arrests and there's data suggests that these reduce police involved shootings and other quote unquote adverse events. Right? So post booking involves these concepts of mental health courts and also addiction or substance use courts, called different things across different areas of the country. These are post booking is usually some form of a specialized court. However, another part of or another aspect of post booking diversion is specialized probation. Specialized probation look like. They tend to have the POs tend to have smaller caseloads, and their clients are all have a known diagnosis for mental disorder. Theoretically, it's not stated as explicitly in the article, but this can include other behavioral health disorders. Um, could, may not. So it's actually an interesting point that I don't think they get into in the article. Talk about folks who might qualify to be in a specialized probation program. Could that be people with addiction illnesses as well? But I don't think it's clearly stated in the article. Um, better training of the or specific training for the POs involved, and in fact, I don't think the article states this explicitly, but um, these POs can be potentially be social workers, can be bachelor's level social work BSWs, for instance. Um, so, in some cases, the requirements to be a PO in terms of education and training may be higher and more specifically geared to behavioral health than other PO non-specialized PO roles. Okay. Um, in specialized probation, the POs are more involved in accessing community resources. Generally, these specialized PO programs are going to have some kind of community reintegration support, the kind of programs that many of you do your field placements in, and programs that I'm generally a pretty big fan of because they're really great examples of generally of small investment having a tremendous and measurable human and economic dividend. when you measure by when when talking about economic, when you measure the cost of reincarceration, the whole process of law enforcement involvement, court involvement, and imprisonment. Those things are expensive, uh, or at least they're much more expensive than having social workers and community integration programs. So also in here we have what's called forensic transition teams. Okay, same thing as the community intervention. All right, where caseworkers like social workers um, will actually go into correctional facilities and do evaluations and maybe perhaps follow some kind of eligibility criteria for additional services. And most importantly, to me anyway, is carrying that support, both the clinical support as well as case management support, from jail, prison, back into the community, helping them get set up with housing, helping them get set up with a job, making sure they have social supports in place, um, peer support, for those in addiction recovery, peer support, um, continuity of care. All of these things greatly reduce the risk of re-involvement in the criminal justice system. And that's good economics, not just good human stuff. So, and there's this, so in kind of along this line of community transition and forensic transition teams is this concept of this model of critical time intervention, meaning the idea being a small investment, even a very short, defined, rigid period of time in which this person is leaving the prison system and re-entering the community, that you concentrate lots of support, exactly what I was just saying in terms of occupation, housing, healthcare, social, and if just focusing resources on that person for a short period of time can greatly reduce the risk of them getting re-involved in the criminal justice system. And then this way, not only do you have the human benefits, but you have someone who's in the workforce and contributing. You're having someone who is healthier and less likely to need acute care services, and you have someone who's less likely to be back involved in the criminal justice system and the booking system and the court system and the prison system. These are all things that cost taxpayers a lot of money, cost them a lot more than these transition team programs or these critical time intervention programs. Cost a lot more.